Hey, what's up, Silas here. In this video, I'm going to be responding, it's going to be a response of sorts to an episode 88 of the Bob Murphy Show, which is a podcast by economist Bob Murphy, Christian economist Bob Murphy, and we'll see why that's important here. It's titled Ludwig von Mises versus God. So he's addressing specifically something that Mises said in Human Action about God that libertarians, he says atheist libertarians, have been asking him about. This is my sort of response to that. Hey, so why am I talking about this? Why this topic? Well, first let's talk about Bob Murphy. Just a good chance you click this video because you know something about Bob Murphy. And if you don't, let me just give you a little introduction to him, and then we'll get more into the content of the response to his response that people have asked him about Mises and stuff. Anyway, so here we go. About the author, this is from bobmurphyshow.com. There'll be a link below to this, and this is a page where you'll be able to find the actual podcast and listen to that, or maybe you've listened to it already and you're coming here. Anyway, so here we go. So about the author, Robert, a Christian and economist, research assistant professor with the Free Market Institute at Texas Tech, senior fellow with the Mises Institute, and co-host with Tom Woods of the podcast Contra Krugman. And Contra Krugman podcast, it's just, okay, Tom Woods and Bob Murphy are very popular Austrian economists, English. Anyway, so they're very popular economists. Anyway, back to this. And with Contra Krugman, it's a show where they go against they go against Paul Krugman, who is a what's it called? He's a Keynesian, and then they have the memes of Keynes being a pedo, which is going on online. And you might have seen some of those. Well, anyway, so they go against him. He says some really absurd things about econ and other things, sociology and all these other things. And then Tom Woods and Bob Murphy approaching it more from the economist, that's it, from the economist standpoint. Okay, this is me from the future, kind of from the future. I was recording this and I was giving the intro to why I'm actually talking about this, and I do talk about a few other things. And then it turns out, like, I looked at the timer, it was like 8 minutes in. Like, that's a long time. So I'm going to put a mark on the screen here now where the actual review of the thing starts. And the review of the thing is pretty much, I was listening to this as I was taking my daily walk. And as I was listening to the podcast, something would come and they'd be like, oh, no. And then I'd take down some notes and like the note on my phone. I'd pause I'd pause the podcast, then take down some notes on my response to it. So that's kind of how it's going to be. So it's not going to be like playing actual parts of it. I'm going to kind of give an idea of, I think, where he was in the thing, an intro, and then get to my point. So it's better if you actually listen to it and back to the actual review. And he goes at it and he cuts them down. I mean, he just puts things straight. He's like, look, this is what Paul Krugman is stating in this sense, but using the Austrian lens, this is kind of how we see things. And it just makes sense. And I did not know about Austrian economics until I think I found out about it somewhat through Milton Friedman and Thomas Sowell sometime back about 5 years ago, and then got more into the whole sphere of libertarianism and things like that. I would consider myself, I guess, I have some libertarian leanings, but I'd consider myself more anarcho-capitalist if I had to define my socio-political standpoint on things. And then that's where I'm coming at things from, with a non-aggression principle, and thinking like, hey, capitalism is kind of the best way to get things that we know of right now, to get the financial system and the economics of everything going around. That seems to be the best way to organize things. There might be something better later. I don't know. And right now, from what I've seen, the Austrian school seems to be doing the best job of actually looking at things and understanding things and making some sense out of it. And that's kind of how I came to know about Bob Murphy and Tom Woods and the Mises Institute. And I've done some videos about different things related to the Austrian School of Econ and things like that. And it's something that I agree with. But as it's mentioned here, Bob Murphy, or Robert Murphy, he opens up even here with saying Christian and economist. So for him, Christianity is something important to his life. Do I think it informs his econ? I don't think it necessarily does. Just like I don't think Paul Krugman's Judaism, belief in Jewishness. Is he Jewish? I think he's Jewish. If he believes in Judaism, the God of the Jews and things like that, I don't disbelieve in the God of the Jews because Paul Krugman believes in it. Just like I wouldn't believe in Jesus or in God, or the biblical God, just because Mises does or Mises doesn't. That's not going to make me not believe him. I'm not going to believe in God just because, oh, Bob Murphy does. If it got to a point where every single Austrian economist came out and agreed with the actual way that Bob Murphy defines God, that's not going to be enough to convince me on its own. I'd have to look at the evidence and see if it's convincing. And so far, I've looked at a lot of evidence about biblical gods and haven't found any of it convincing. Because there's many forms of the Bible, there's many different ways that people look at these things, and I haven't found it that convincing. So this is my response to his response. And I'll give him some kudos or just notification here, just agree and accept and acknowledge that Bob Murphy even states, he ends up with a spoiler for the end of his whole video if you haven't seen it. He says, I'm not actually proving God here. I'm not actually giving you proof of God here. I'm just addressing, as he says here, Bob tackles a common objection from atheist libertarians. Doesn't Mises, in Human Action, refute the very notion of the biblical God? Specifically, why wouldn't an omnipotent, omniscient being remove all uneasiness with one action? And this is something that he's addressing in this. So I am just responding to kind of how he addressed it. When I first heard this, I was like, oh no, this was going to happen. It was bound to happen. And this is a question I've asked religious people. And I decided, let me ask in this group. I asked it on a post by Lou Rockwell. And Lou Rockwell is another economist. And he's actually the one who founded and is running, not founded, but he's running the Mises Institute. And he does a great job with that. He also has a page, a blog where he posts things. And he posted something about God. And he was like, okay, I want to ask libertarians and ask people in this anarcho-capitalist kind of environment. Would you, this is another question to you, I'll probably ask in a separate video, but would you want to, United States of America, if you have a certain belief in the Christian God, you believe in that and you think this is the actual creator, this person who created, or this being created the universe and gave us these rules, this way to run the world. I mean, to live our lives, to exist in a good way, to be one with God, be right with God in that kind of sense. Would you want that the United States of America, despite what's in the First Amendment, would you want the United States of America to adopt your version of Christianity, despite what's in the First Amendment, as I said? Because I'm wondering, why not? If you actually think that is actual instruction from on high, shouldn't that be above the Republic? Shouldn't that be above the Constitution? Why not have that be the thing that everybody should actually live by, at least the most powerful country in the world? Or if you were starting your own country, would you want it to be a theocracy in that kind of sense, have your religion embedded into it? Because there is also this discussion, and there was another separate video, might talk about this in a separate video, where Tom Woods also talked about, he had someone on the show talking about if the United States of America actually was established as a Christian country. And throughout the entire video, the evidence given was like, okay, there's nothing in there that's explicitly Christian. Even if the people were Christian, that doesn't mean that I'm supposed to believe that it should be Christian now. The people owned slaves back then. There was probably a lot of racist people out there. They had certain ideas about certain things. Some of them believed in, alchemy and things like that. Just because they believed those things, and they could have even included and enshrined those things in the actual Constitution, doesn't mean I have to think those things are still positive, or that I still think those things are positive. There's actually provisions for slavery in the actual establishment of the United States of America. Does that mean because they did that, that was part of them, oh, we should still have that to be part of the Constitution, part of the United States of America? No, we improve and we change. The idea they had about economics is entirely different than what the whole Mises Institute is about, what the entire Austrian School of Economics is. Like, you look at what they were saying there and compared to what the founding fathers were thinking, it's different. But that was a little of a side. So now we're going to get back to this. The way I'm going to do this, I would suggest that you actually listen to his podcast first, because I first heard this, was like, oh no, posted a comment to get reaction with this. And because I was thinking, hey, I have an idea. I've talked to certain people in this kind of sphere, the people who'd be interested following the Bob Murphy show, following him it was on Facebook where I saw it. And I posted that question and have some good interaction with people, because I thought, hey, there's a chance of me asking this here and I'll actually have some decent conversations and decent back and forth, and I had some back and forth of that there. And I decided, okay, let me actually listen to this. And I listened to it on the walk today. So I was kind of listening, and then I'd get to the point and take down some notes. So when I give this review, I'm going to be giving some insight on what? No, we're back to the review. So we're going to get right into the review now. These are the notes I took, as I said, as walking around. When I first listened to the actual podcast, when I first saw that thing being posted, I was like, oh no, because I had an inkling of what it was going to be like, but I ended up scrolling through, going to the link of the page, scrolling through and hearing, and he was talking about like Harry Potter and Star Wars. Like, oh no, he's not going to go to that way to kind of, and and anyway, so he does go into the thing where he opens up, and as I said, he's not trying to prove God. He's just saying how he sees God and why what Mises said doesn't refute how he sees God. So this is me talking about that and just giving some general ideas to how I understand my general assumption, my general idea, my general collection or awareness of what the Christian God of certain things and certain things that he also directly says here. And I'll just go into one of the things that he does say. One of the main things he says, he sees God as an author. That's the example he gives. In the first 20 minutes of the podcast is giving the comparison, and he uses J.K. Rowling as the author of the Harry Potter series, and he uses George Lucas as the writer, creator of the Star Wars series. And there's problematic things with that already, because first of all, there's no real sense of anything there. It's kind of, he's talking about how the characters exist in that world without a knowledge of, how would it be if Harry Potter knew about J.K. Rowling? How would it be if Luke Skywalker knew about George Lucas? And to me, this is already showing that he has some certain limitation on the actual amount of fiction and things that he's adhered to, because there's several sorts of different genres and things that actually get into this kind of situation where they talk about what if the character actually knows that they're a character in the book. And I've kind of thought of some stories of my own as well too, where I'm like, okay, what if that character realizes, hey, I'm part of a story? That is a thing. Even something like the Truman Show, where the guy's like, oh, I realize there's somebody else controlling these things and I am part of someone's narrative. And the fact that he's using a fictional book, he's using a fictional thing that involves magic, that involves the Force, in order to compare what he views about the Christian God, the biblical God, is telling to me already, because I've pointed that out where people will freak out. Recently, you had people freaking out or making fun of the Christians who were freaking out that Jesus was being changed to gay by some Netflix show. And you were like, look at these people. I can't believe they're freaking out about this. And those same people will freak out. Oh, I can't believe they made Luke Skywalker do that. Luke Skywalker's not supposed to do that. But no, these are similar things. They're borrowing. These are fake created characters that people think in canon there's certain behaviors that they're supposed to have. In canon, this is what they do. This is not the real world. This is in canon. That's the behavior that they have in that story. So people get attached to it, and I get that people get attached to that, but there's a difference with looking at Harry Potter and thinking, I can actually go to that street and that train station in London and actually walk through the wall. That's how people look at the Bible. So using this example is kind of tough. And he does state that he thinks God is both omniscient and omnipotent. So that's a big thing. That's a big thing to kind of think of when you're talking about this whole author. Yeah, so now into the actual review. He opens up by talking about Harry Potter and Star Wars. And he's talking about these two things because his contention is he views God as an author of our works. And we, I guess, in his idea of the world, are just the creations that God has written. And he gets into this further on into his actual discussion. And he says God is like an author who just wrote the thing at once, because he also thinks he's omnipotent and omniscient. So he just wrote it at once. Creation was there, reality was there, and that's there. And he goes into the whole time situation. And unfortunately with the time situation is, if you go into that, if you say, oh, well, that's how most scientists have actually looked into this, actually think how time is, time could be different. And I used to think this as well. In my younger years, I was raised as a Christian, non-denominational, got into Presbyterian, was in a Catholic school when I was here in Kenya as a kid. I even started school in like Marymount Academy, which was in France, which was a Catholic school and things like that. So it's a mix of all these things, and I've gone in and out and different things, gone to different cultures, different communities, and tried to understand and tried to make sense of it. And some of my apologetics coming out was that whole thing where, oh, it doesn't have to be 7 days. It's not just literally 7 24-hour days. Different cultures, different communities have different calendars. So who are we to say that to God, that a day he's tied into this 7-day cycle of the earth? He's not on earth. He's not dealing with gravity and the sun and all these other things. For him, he could have just written 7 days so anyone can kind of understand it. But it could just be millions of years. It could be all those kind of things. So that's kind of a mentality I had. And to see him have it too was like, I mean, because I had come over from that. It was like, no, that's apologetics. Doesn't necessarily make sense. But he kind of goes from that situation where he's like, look, God just created everything. To him, he's just in time that kind of way, where it's not necessarily the way we are actually experiencing time. And I do understand, if you do think of a omniscient being, he's not going to be subject to the time that we are dealing with. But if that being can actually affect the world that we're in, then there's going to be ways to test that part when that person comes and affects it. Just like if you're an author and you write a book, when the book is being read, it's okay. That author can't directly affect it. He's outside of it. The author has written. The creation is there. I created some things and put them out there. They're online. You can watch it. But if I, the author, go in there and change something, there's ways you can detect that I have gone in there and changed something. You can be like, okay, this is a previous version, and now this has been edited. Look, somebody might have come in here and edited it. So if you are in a situation where you're claiming that there is a God that still affects the world, then it's a different situation. But I think with his author thing, he's kind of talking about how the story's already written. Things are already the way they are. So he's actually not present in the world, because I didn't understand this. From what he was talking about, I don't really get what he gets at with God. Does he think prayer actually works? Is there a point? Because even if Harry Potter was aware of J.K. Rowling, I think if you think prayer is a thing, it's kind of stating that you think Harry Potter could have been aware of J.K. Rowling and then prayed to J.K. Rowling to just make Voldemort die without him actually doing something. But then maybe J.K. Rowling has a reason, and she's like, no, because of what I want to do with my life as J.K. Rowling, as your creator, I'm going to make sure you go through all these other steps and you actually have to fight him. I can even tell you that you will win, but I'm not going to take away any of the actual fear and anything that's involved in that. For some reason, I'm going to think that's something you have to deal with. I can just jump you to the same mental state that you'd have after that in some entirely different other way, but I'm going to actually have you go through all these steps to do it for whatever reason that I'm not going to let you know. And that doesn't sound like a God worth worshiping. That sounds like kind of a dick of a person. I don't know. You let me know. So he talks about that, and I was like, look, this is a situation where there's no real sense. Using two made-up things, Star Wars and Harry Potter, might actually be more fitting, because I also think that third thing, the Bible, is also a made-up thing. So I can talk about certain things in the Bible and understand that in canon of the Bible, Jesus is supposed to do X, Y, Z. In canon of the Bible, Jesus isn't gay. So I kind of understand why the Christians are flipping out about Jesus being gay, because they actually take a really strong belief to that thing. Just how some people are freaking out that Luke Skywalker has been turned from this farm boy that goes out and does all these things because he's meant something to them, and now he's just this guy who's drinking like milk, alien milk, titty milk and stuff like that. And he's like, that's not Luke. That's not who Luke Skywalker is. Because to them, that meant something more. To me, it's like, I'm like, all right, Luke, Jesus, made up characters. You want to change them? You want to make Harry Potter to like a transgender, like black 80-year-old man? I don't care. To me, it's like, it's Harry Potter. What was written with Harry Potter was already entertaining enough for me. If you want to change that to something else, have at it. So anyway, another thing he mentions in here, he talks about the situation where some people, he's talking about the situation where Darth Vader dies at his deathbed, and then he kind of turns back and he accepts Luke, or he accepts the Force, he accepts the good side. He's forgiven for all the negative things that he's done, and then it's shown in the end. I think they changed, and this is another thing with the whole changing things around. It's talking about with authors, like this can't really be done, but George Lucas has gone in and changed different parts. Other creators have gone back in and changed actual parts of the works. So this whole idea that you just create a work and it can't be changed is not necessarily completely correct. The work itself does stay, but alterations can be made. You can find a way where you wipe out all the stuff in the past and then you actually create a new thing. And that's also kind of how the Bible came to be. People wrote certain things happened, certain stories were out there, and then somebody came in and were like, okay, we're not going to use that story, we're not going to use that story, we're going to adjust this story, we're going to retrofit this story to fit that kind of thing. And that's how the Bible came to be. So that's kind of interesting how that works in that situation. So there is some familiarity there. So anyway, he's talking about Darth Vader dying, and he was saying, okay, do people see Darth Vader dying and like, oh, he ends up to be with Qui-Gon Jinn and with Yoda at the end in this higher plane with people of the Force? Do people get mad at that? Like, yes, Yes, people get mad at that. That whole idea of deathbed redemption does make people mad. I think that's a really kind of absurd thing to just do for a being to be like, I am so good and so holy that, yeah, you can kill millions of people. But, if on your deathbed, you just say, I accept you, Lord, God is my Savior, Jesus, let me in. God is like, yes, you can come and sit by my side. And all those millions of people that you killed because they never accepted Jesus, they're going to burn in hell. So you killed those people, right? But because you accepted me, you get to spend eternity watching those people, depending on your reading of the biblical God, because it's a different people, different faiths. You're going to watch these people burn in hell forever. No, that's a horrible thing. That does make people bad. That does make people mad. It's not something that people are just like, meh. So he was saying he didn't see it that way. He saw it like redemption. And I can understand. If you're a Christian and you've accepted that whole thing of deathbed redemption as a thing that can happen in your faith and consider it good, you're going to have you're going to be predisposed to thinking it's actually happening in other stories is something good. But to me, I'm like, how about all the other people he killed? How about the people alive? So this God can forgive him for that. But like all those other people who are still suffering from the things that he does, like, okay. So, another thing, and this is what I'm talking about. These stories, there's a reason some of these stories are familiar. There's a reason he's seeing these things. He was talking about how he felt Harry Potter was a ripoff of Star Wars when he first saw it, and then he ended up liking it a lot more. And as I'll agree with him, definitely do read the books if you have the time. Get the audiobooks or read the books. They go into a lot more than the film does, and I think it's a really good story. But these are the part of the reasons they're good stories is they're going through actual archetypes of the human experience. The reason Luke is a messiah in that sense. He's more of a modern God he's a modern God figure, modern religion to a lot of people. He's kind of setting up in that kind of sense. I've talked about how Superman is a god to a lot of people. He's a new American god. In this situation, Harry Potter has that redemption story where he comes out and not redemption, but he goes through challenges and builds himself up. Then he ends up defeating the great evil. He's the chosen one. These are tropes. Just like the Bible itself is a trope. It took tropes, took actual experiences, took actual observations that humans have, borrowed from other religions and stories, and has been also itself taken as inspiration for other things and stories. This is a general human experience. We're all humans who kind of experience this thing. Okay, so he talks about here, and he's like, okay, when he's still talking about the Harry Potter, he's saying it would be different if Harry Potter understood that there was an author who loved him despite all the negative things that he was going through. Now, I think that poisons the well because this was before he actually switched over to talking about God. So he's kind of saying to him, at least, okay, this might not be poison the well because, as I mentioned, he's talking about how he views God. But I've read some stories where it pretty much is just suffering. I don't know if you've watched the movie Martyrs. There's this movie Martyrs. It's a French movie. It's going to have subtitles. It's gruesome. Feeling emotions coming up, just thinking about it. It's a gruesome movie. There's this levels of suffering where it's possible. There's stories out there where the characters just suffer. Characters just outright suffer the entire story. They might have some points where they win, or like even something like Married with Children. Married with Children seemed like at the end of every show, Al Bundy he never actually won. But this is the kind of situation. If you have that, does that mean the author hates the character? This whole situation where I've written stories about characters where I'm just like, I'm interested in this character. I don't necessarily love this character. So I don't know if he's written any fiction or fantasy. But when you're in that creative process, you don't necessarily have to love the character. I've had situations where I've just been dreaming about something. This image comes up, then I draw the character, and then I start thinking, what would this character be doing? I start plugging things with a story, trying to make sense of what it would be, try to put this person in a credible situation. If this happened and that happened, and this happened and that happened. There's some things where I'll think about this happened with a character, but I'll be like, okay, this character did this after they met this character, but then now they leave. I don't think about what else that character is going to do, but then maybe when I'm writing the story later on, I'll be like, oh, that character from the back then, now I can insert them back into the character. So he was talking about something in here about the structure of how people actually create stories, and I don't necessarily think he was quite aware of some of the ways certain stories come to be. I wrote here, yeah. You have little experience with fiction, writing fiction. It depends per creative, but things grow. It's not an entire outline, then fill them in. Like he was thinking, he was like, God just created everything, it's done. The story is out there. We're just living the story. This is kind of that whole who is that? Is it Descartes or something? Was like the brain in a tank type of thing, where it's everything is a simulation, where we're just going through the motions. This is an NPC thing. We're pretty much just non-playable characters in his view of what God is. God has written this code. We're just walking through. Part of the reason I'm making this video is because God wrote that I would make this video. Part of the reason you're watching this video is because God wrote that you will watch this video. That's how he thinks. And no, I'm not for that. There are questions of what exactly is freedom of choice. What is free will? Is everything really just one thing happens, the other thing happens, even in the microscopic level? Like, the reason I end up listening to that video and was mentally enough to actually decide to make this video, was I actually deciding I'm going to make this video or not? Or were they millions and billions of actual things that happened that got me to the point where when I heard this video, my only decision wouldn't be a decision. The only next thing to happen would be calculating all those things together was make this video. So there is that kind of situation, but that still doesn't imply a God at the beginning of all of those things. And as I said, Bob Murphy never says in this video that he has actually proved God. He's just talking about the situation with Mises. But this is my video and I'm talking about other things here, and you're enjoying it, hopefully. So let's see what the next point here. Okay, next is a part where he's talking about the whole time situation, talking about God is outside of time. He works in a certain way. He's written the story. It's a different thing. And then he comes in and he talks about how this is the whole question of free will and evil. And he kind of skips over that. He just mentions that and he throws it aside. He's like, there's that whole little thing about free will and evil. It's kind of hard to discuss. No, that is part of the main key. If evil is actually written, if that's actually planned in God's story, then God wanted that evil to occur. And in general, when we look at somebody, if somebody plans something, knows in their mind that it is evil, is bad, it's going to hurt people, and still does it and still sets into motion, you would consider that person bad. Like, this is one thing I wonder. How much do people think somebody's creation says about them as a person? I wonder this as a creative too. If I'm writing a story about homosexuals having sex, does that make me homosexual? If I write a story of somebody who goes out and kills millions of people, does that make me somebody who wants to kill millions of people? You see, that's a different thing. If I'm just writing a story in that way, I understand you can divorce the creator or the person, the author, from the actual works. I can divorce Mises' actual creations, human action. I can dissolve his thoughts about economics from his personal being. If he was an avid racist, just a raging racist, that doesn't necessarily change what he said about economics. So I kind of get how you can separate some of these things, but where is he coming at with this situation? And then he's talking about the free will and the evil. No, that is a key thing. In this situation, in that situation of the book, and he's looking at the author, as I mentioned, Harry Potter cannot just not fight Voldemort. He doesn't have the free will to do it. So you're saying, in canon, Harry Potter was making decisions. But no, in reality, when you look at it, when you look at the entire thing, there is no actual free will for Harry Potter. In the Harry Potter universe, you can say that character has been written as one that is behaving with free will. But in the reality, in the actual thing, even in that universe, he's not acting free will because he's actually following somebody else's path. He's actually following a code. He's following a program. So if he thinks that's how it is, Harry Potter can't just not fight Voldemort. He can't just kill himself. He can't just find a spell to lose his powers and then go off and live with Ginny by himself. He can't do these things. Nobody has any free will. Vader didn't have any free will in that situation. Vader had to behave in a way that makes people who are viewing him seem like he has free will, even though he had no free will, because George Lucas and everybody else involved had written the character in that way. So he thinks of us as NPCs. I can't see him not thinking of us as NPCs. And I don't get that in that situation. Well, at the end, he's talking about how the author still loves the characters. And I think his definition of love sucks. From what he said, from how he's using it here, it sucks. If I knew somebody, if I loved somebody, and I had the ability of giving them some positive information, some positive knowledge, some positive abilities, without them having to go through some horrific things before it, I would grant that to them. And if I was omnipotent, I could find a way to do that. If his claim is that every evil thing that happens, every horrible negative thing that happens in the world today is due to God thinking that is the only way for us to get the positive things that come from after it, that is there is some kind of limited view of what I would imagine omnipotence to be. But if he thinks that you could actually have the ability to give somebody the positives of going through an action without them having to go through that negative action, and you still choose to put them through that negative action and consider that love, I don't consider that love. And he does mention that he was raised as a Catholic and then he was an ardent atheist, and he said, oh, there was a time when he would have liked what Mises said, and then now he's got back to like more Presbyterian and things like that. So there could be some of that where I was trying to think. Like I said, I was raised a Christian. I was trying to understand, why is everybody telling me this? Because they were told those things too, and they were lied to about those things. And I think they're lies, because there's certain claims being made that are just demonstrably false. You can't know that information. You could say you don't know, but people were claiming to know certain things. They don't know how things were made, but they somehow know the thing that made that thing that they don't know about. And it's like, and you don't have to necessarily know how a thing, if you know how something works, you don't have to know anything about the thing that created that thing. If I know how somebody can paint, if I know somebody has the ability to do certain things, doesn't mean I have to know how they actually do the things that they do. So I understand those things are not related, not connected. But okay, so just winding up. Okay, so he does say that he was raised as a Christian, and then he was an atheist, and then he had an epiphany, and this is the whole thing, the epiphany situation. Doesn't go into it more, and as I mentioned, he says after this that he hasn't proved God. He's not making a case for God. He's just saying this is what, according to what Mises said, talking about how an actor, if a God was truly all-powerful, all-knowing, and was content, he wouldn't actually act, because we've seen with all life forms, if you're content, you don't actually decide to act. The reason of human action is because we feel that, hey, we can actually do better, so we do X, Y, Z in order to improve our state in life. And I do agree with that. I personally think that everybody does things that they consider good. They find a way to rationalize that this is the positive thing for them to do versus these things that are negative. This is going to improve my quality of life or maintain my quality of life and avoid it dropping. So all these things are to achieve some subjective form of good. Now, I think it is a thing when, if we agree that human flourishing, or if we agree that certain goals that we want to achieve, we can decide, are these the more positive ways to get to this, or these more negative ways to get this? And this is part of why I'm a fan of Austrian economics, because what I've seen, if we agree that, hey, let's get more humans actually interacting, I think trade is a good thing. Exchange of ideas and goods kind of gets us to a better place. It's what's improved the world. And I look at it, I'm like, socialism or capitalism? Which one works better? Keynesian economics, Austrian economics. Which one works better? And I think Austrian economics, I think capitalism, those things do work better than the options of things like Keynesian economics, things like communism, things like socialism. So that's kind of how I look at these things. So I do understand there's subjective situations, there's objective things when you're actually trying to get to a certain target. We don't have the same targets. We don't believe in the same things. Something that might be good to be might result in other people losing. We're going back talking about that game, how, oh, God, do you know who's going to win this game? Somehow God might know that, oh, no, I know. The players on that team have prayed to me enough, and they're actually a lot better than the players on that team who have done the calculus in my life. And despite these other players actually praying, those other prayers, I'm not going to actually listen to those prayers, because these prayers mean more, or in his case, I've already written down the story, so these prayers don't even matter. Anyway, so the whole situation, when it ends up with that whole line of the epiphany, it was a little, I was a bit disappointed. I mean, I don't know what I expected, but I was, okay, the epiphany thing again. It's something that I've heard before. Because this is a situation. This is kind of, he's like, I'm Bob Murphy. I have this knowledge of the creator of everything, the creator that's created entire existence. But instead, I'll focus on talking about economics, making fun of Paul Krugman, and focusing on these other things, and let you silly atheists and non-believers and believers of other gods just go along and play your parts in my God story, in my God's good, fun story, and at the end of it, you guys can have fun burning in hell. That's kind of where I'm at looking at this kind of situation. Because if you truly did believe you actually had the knowledge of the greatest creator, the creator of everything, and you felt that knowledge is a positive thing in day-to-day existence, in the way people can live their life, then why aren't you focusing more on that versus talking about economics? Or does he think God is just something where there's no need to actually be aware of the God or to worship the God or to know about the God? You just live a good life, and then at the end of the day, doesn't matter as long as you've lived a good life, that God knows enough to be like, okay, this person is good? Or does it not matter at all? Does he not have to actually talk to anyone else about God because God has already written that that person will find God or not? I don't know. I don't get this. So this is my sort of rambling response video to Bob Murphy's video. Let me know what you guys thought. What did you guys think about the Bob Murphy video, or podcast and thing? What do you think about this video? Some merchandise on the screen. Like, share, and subscribe. Till next video, goodbye.